All right, so let's dive right in and, imagine this for a sec, okay? It's that big move-in day, right? You've got your acceptance letter staring back at you from your fridge, the one from that Canadian university you were over the moon about, and your bags are packed, and, like, you can practically taste the poutine already. You're totally ready for this incredible academic adventure.
It's a super exciting time for sure.
But then, bam! Rejection city. Your study permit application gets denied.
Oof, yeah, talk about a major buzzkill, right? And honestly, it's heartbreaking to see because we're seeing a lot more of that these days.
Really? So, like, it's not just a small uptick, it's like a full-on trend.
Oh, yeah, it's a serious surge in applications. And frankly, it's putting a real strain on the whole system, you know?
So beyond just processing this flood of applications, are there other concerns like on the ground in Canada?
Definitely. I mean, think about it. Housing is already tough in a lot of university towns, right? And then there are the questions of, whether Canada's support systems for students can handle this many new faces all at once.
Right. So it's about more than just numbers. It's about making sure it works for everyone already there.
Exactly. And that's a big part of why Canada decided to put these new caps on study permits in place. They kind of slammed the brakes a bit in 2024,
No, okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about these caps.
So they decided on 485,000 new study permits for this year, which I know still sounds like a ton,
It does.
but compared to 2023, that's actually a 35% decrease.
Whoa, 35%. That's a huge drop. So are they just like cutting people off after they hit that magic number? How does it even work?
It's not quite that cut and dry. Each province gets a certain number of study permits to hand out based on, how many people live there.
Mm.
And naturally, the provinces that have seen the biggest jumps in student applications are the ones getting squeezed the most.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So places like Ontario and British Columbia, which are already super popular with international students, they're facing the biggest changes.
Exactly. And at first, the government was mainly focused on undergrads and college students.
Because master's and PhD students don't need as much support.
Well, the thinking was those folks often contribute a lot to research and, Canada's whole innovation scene. They figured those programs were kind of exempt.
Right, makes sense. But didn't something change, though, recently?
You're right on the money. They actually just extended those caps. And, yep,
Yeah.
even master's and PhD students are now under the microscope.
Whoa, no more free pass to come to Canada for the brainiacs, huh?
Not exactly.
Huh.
They did set aside like 12% of the spots for those higher level applicants. But it's still a huge shift.
So if they're trying to, get a handle on temporary residents, why not just issue fewer tourist visas or something? Why focus so much on students?
Well, it's all part of the same puzzle, you see. Whether someone's here to study or work or just visit for a bit, managing those temporary resident numbers is about making sure that Canada's social systems can actually handle everyone you know. Things like healthcare and housing and all that.
Right, it's about the big picture.
So making sure things are sustainable over the long haul.
Yeah. Okay, so it's about finding that balance. But let's bring it back down to earth for a second, talk about our listener. Let's say you're that person, you've poured your heart and soul into this application and you get that gut-wrenching rejection letter. What happens next? What are your options?
And that's where things get really interesting. That's where this new pilot project comes in.
Yeah.
Like a beacon of hope, It could be a game changer for some people.
So we've talked about some of those big challenges facing international students hoping to study in Canada, but let's shift gears a bit and talk solutions. Okay, specifically this new pilot project that's supposed to make the whole review process a little less, terrifying.
Yeah, it's definitely a step in the right direction.
So tell me more.
It's officially called the Study Permit Pilot Project. Catchy, right?
Has a nice ring to it.
And basically, it's a joint effort between Canada's federal court and IRCC, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada.
Right, IRCC.
And the goal here is to tackle those crazy backlogs and long processing times.
Because who wants to put their life on hold indefinitely, right?
Exactly. It's brutal. So this pilot project is all about making the system a little less, sluggish.
Okay, so if the regular system is like, taking the scenic route, what's this like? A high-speed train.
That's a good way to put it. So instead of waiting those agonizing 14 to 18 months for a decision.
Which is just unheard of.
I know, right?
Yeah.
This pilot project could potentially get you an answer in under 5 months.
Okay, now those are some timelines I can get behind. But there's got to be a catch, right? Like, it can't be that easy.
Well, you're right. There are some hoops to jump through. Your case needs to meet certain criteria. First off, things need to be pretty straightforward. You and IRCC both need to agree on the basic facts of your case.
Okay, so no, he said, she said, no arguing over timelines or missing documents.
Exactly. Everything needs to be crystal clear.
Gotcha. So what else?
The issue itself, the reason for the rejection has to be something that can be resolved without a ton of drama. Like maybe there was a misunderstanding about a requirement or a document got accidentally skipped over, something like that.
So this isn't the way to challenge a really complex legal issue or bring in a whole bunch of new evidence, right?
Right. If your case is super complicated, then the standard judicial review process might still be the better option.
Right.
But if it's more like, hey, I think there was an honest mistake or misinterpretation.
This could be your ticket. So let's say I'm listening to this and thinking, okay, this might be me. My case seems pretty straightforward. IRCC and I are on the same page about the facts. How do I actually get the ball rolling with this pilot project?
Well, it's actually pretty streamlined. You'll use the same form you'd use for a regular judicial review form, IR1. But here's the key. You'll specifically mention the study permit pilot project in a few places on the form, just to make it super clear that you want in on this faster track.
Okay, so no need to go on a scavenger hunt through a million government websites.
Nope. The federal court's website lays it all out super clearly, step-by-step instructions, no legal jargon needed.
Now that's what I like to hear. But before we get too excited, let's talk timelines. You said this pilot project could significantly speed things up, but are we talking strict deadlines here? Because let's be real, nobody wants to be stuck in limbo for longer than absolutely necessary. 15 days. 15 days. That's barely enough time to go from I love poutine to I need all the comfort food I can get after a stressful rejection.
It's definitely a tight turnaround.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why you got to be ready to hit the ground running. If your application gets refused, don't just sit there refreshing your inbox.
Yeah.
Jump right on figuring out if this pilot project is a good fit for your situation.
Okay, so let's say you think it is. You've checked all the boxes, submitted everything. Now what? Just the waiting game begins.
Pretty much. While you're catching up on your Canadian comfort food research, the judge will be reviewing your application, along with something called a simplified certified tribunal record. Don't let the fancy name throw you off, though. It's basically just IRCC's summary of their decision and, their take on the whole thing.
Simplified being the key word, hopefully. But okay, after all that, what happens next? What are the different ways this whole thing could play out?
So there are basically three main scenarios. First, and let's be real, this is the one nobody wants to hear, is that the judge dismisses your leave request.
Meaning
they basically agree with IRCC's original decision to refuse your study permit.
Okay, but even though it's a no, it sounds like with this pilot project, at least it's a fast no, right?
Exactly. Even if the decision isn't what you were hoping for, this pilot project gets you that answer way faster.
Okay, so faster closure, which honestly can be super valuable when you're trying to make big decisions.
For sure. So that's scenario one. Now for possibility number two.
Hit me with it.
This one's a little more nuanced. The judge could grant you leave, which means they're willing to take a closer look at everything.
Okay, so there's still hope at this point.
There is. But then they could still end up siding with IRCC and ultimately dismiss the judicial review.
So close yet so far. But even in that situation, it's not just a flat no, right?
You got it. The judge will actually explain their reasoning. And honestly, that feedback can be super valuable. It might help you figure out why your application wasn't successful the first time around, and then you can use that to make your next application even stronger.
So it's a learning experience, even if it's not the outcome you were hoping for. Okay, so what's the third scenario? This is the happy end thing, right?
This is the big one. This is where the judge is like, you know what, I agree with you, and grants both leave A and D the judicial review.
Let's go. Someone pop the champagne.
Right. So what this really means is the judge has looked at everything with a fine-tooth comb, and they think your arguments actually hold water. They're essentially saying, I don't agree with how IRCC handled this one.
Wow. Okay, so then what?
Then your application goes back to IRCC for round two. This time, though, a different officer will be looking it over. It's like a clean slate, a fresh start.
Talk about a second chance. That's incredible.
It's definitely a huge deal. But, and I know I sound like a broken record here, it's important to remember that there are a lot of moving pieces in the Canadian immigration system right now.
Right. This pilot project isn't happening in a vacuum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We talked about those stricter post-graduation work permit requirements, and then there's the whole thing with spousal open work permits. It's a lot to keep track of.
It really is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Honestly, knowledge is power. Do your research, really understand what's required, and don't be afraid to reach out to the experts if you need help. Even though this pilot project is a great step toward making the system faster and more efficient, the Canadian immigration system can still be, well, pretty darn complicated. But if you're persistent and prepared and you know what you're up against, You've got this.
And on that note of cautious optimism, we'll wrap up this deep dive. We hope you found this exploration of the Canadian study permit landscape helpful and maybe even a little bit empowering. Until next time, keep those applications strong, those documents organized, and those dreams big.